Sierra snowmelt underway. That's going to result in flooding, and Yosemite announcing they're closing. I'm ABC 10 Chief Meteorologist Monica Woods out of Northern California in Sacramento, and we knew this was coming. The spring snowmelt. Here you can see the images over Yosemite. All that snow has to melt at some point. We're just hoping that it's slowly going to meter down the hill. But unfortunately, with these warming temperatures, we are going to see the risk of some elevated flood risks, especially in the Sierra as we head into that flood watch. Now, here's a look at one of the locations. This is going to be at the Pohono Bridge on the Merced River. This is where we're looking at the rises coming into that flood stage, cresting on Sunday. But Yosemite saying this could indeed last into June. They're going to be taking a look day by day as we start to charter through the snowmelt coming down the hill. The good news is that they are saying you're automatically canceled and the reservations are void at this point and refunds are going to be issued. The problem with Yosemite, folks, for anybody that doesn't know, you have to book those places some 1 year in advance. People wait online to that moment where they can hit go to get to Yosemite. So unfortunately, this year just not panning out. It's not the only place that we're going to be watching with those river rises. We've got 5 areas of concern, most notably for California. It's going to be the Merced River, but also the Carson River. That's going to be just to the south of Lake Tahoe, both on the California and Nevada side with those rises on the rivers. We're also going to see some creeks and streams getting awfully close to their banks and some low water areas could bind some water that will make it impassable for low water areas, some roadways up in the high country. So even though the snow is gone, unfortunately, the danger still remains. Some of those water temperatures, think about it. This is snow melt coming down the hill, only about 50 to 60 degrees. The farther away you get from the snowpack, say the San Joaquin River in Stockton, that's at 63 degrees. It's going to be a little bit warmer, but the closer we get to that immediate snow melt, we're only about 35 to 50 degrees. Water temperature cools the body, that cold water, about 25 times faster than cold air. People can get hypothermia very quickly, lose muscle control, and unfortunately, this time of year, we do have a lot of water rescues. Some people don't make it, wear a life jacket. That's the most important thing. Life jackets save lives. Just to put this into perspective, those cold water temperatures, for anybody that's been over to the Pacific in California, and if you haven't, it's quite a shock to get in that water. Usually people go in maybe to their toes. Kids get in a little bit longer, but most adults will get out pretty quickly. San Francisco Bar water temperature is at 55 degrees. So our rivers, generally speaking, running much colder than the Pacific. Let's get to the snow melt. Right now, we're at about 1 to 3 inches on average of melting a day. It is going to be dependent on a couple of factors. Temperature isn't the number one factor for snow melt. It's access to sunlight and also the snow color. We'll go into detail on each of these points. First, let's talk about the sun angle. We're past the vernal equinox, so at this point, the sun's most direct rays are moving north of the equator. So by the summer solstice, the sun appears highest in the sky. We have longer periods of daylight and also more heat energy. Our sunlight, look at the difference in just a matter of a month with access to daylight. Today, we had 13 hours and 37 minutes of daylight in just a month. We're going to increase that to almost exactly an extra hour. So again, more access to that sunlight. Now let's talk about dirty snow compared to white snow, albedo effect. Dirty snow melts faster. That's because it absorbs more sunlight. If you've ever had a dark shirt on in the middle of summer, you know you get pretty hot. You're advised to wear light clothing. That's because sunlight gets reflected. So if you've got white snow, it actually reflects some of that sunlight and won't melt quite as fast. At this point in the season, we got a lot of dirty snow melt. And one other thing is to look at how much wildfire activity we had over the summer. Sometimes when we have a really bad fire season, even deep into the winter, we get some sloughing from the ash that still remains on the trees. Now, last season, we really didn't have a huge fire season, but in years past, it was certainly present. And so we saw a rapid melting of snow up in the high country. This is generally the path that we follow. We'll look at the North American, or actually the North, Middle, and South American River, and then also the Feather River. This is just for reference, just to kind of show you, okay, how does that snow melt actually happen, move into our rivers, and eventually make it out to sea or into many of our canals and the aqueduct. Now, the northern part of the state gets 75% of the precipitation. The southern half of the state uses about 75% of the water. So it's a real balancing act for water managers. As far as the snowpack, it does head into, again, we're just using this as a reference point, some of the rivers. The American River has a lot of reservoirs. Throughout the state, though, we have roughly about 1,500 reservoirs. So these are just a couple that we're looking at. Lake Oroville is going to be connected to the Feather River, and then Folsom Lake. We hear a lot about that on the American River. Once releases start to happen, that water continues to head downstream to the low-lying elevations. That is going to be the valley. Once it meets a connecting point, this is the confluence of the American and the Sacramento River, which is right around downtown Sacramento. You can see a lot of flooding during certain parts of the year. That water then heads out to the Delta and then sometimes heads out to sea. Other times, this water will be connected to the canals and eventually the aqueduct, many aqueducts actually, throughout the state. And so that water gets sent down south. So it's really important to take a look at that water path. Now, that particular area throughout the state only in minor risk of flooding for the spring flood outlook. However, when we get to the central and southern part of the Sierra, and particularly the San Joaquin Valley, we've been talking a lot about the Tulare Basin. That has a moderate risk of flooding. Unfortunately, we've already been seeing flooding throughout the course of our winter season, and it is possibly going to last all the way through June. There's really no way for that water in parts of the Tulare Basin to get out unless it's pumped or taken out physically, because there's no connection there to any major rivers. So you can see with our snowpack here, the Northern Sierra, it was impressive, not necessarily record setter or the Central Sierra, but the Southern Sierra, by all accounts, has been the outlier here with just well above average, as well as well above any recent years. Our max year, 82, 83, still above that. That's unfortunately where we get into trouble. In that area, we have very narrow canals and transportation for that water once it gets down the hill. So we take a look at the Tulare Basin 6-station index, and one of the wettest years here, you can see we're running just slightly below that. Unfortunately, we're going to continue to see more inflow of that snowmelt, and we're going to have some problems continuing deep into not only the spring, but very likely the early summer. So you can see some of that snowpack up there will head towards places like Fresno, through Visalia, and through the Central Valley. There we go into Tulare Basin. You can see it's just like this pocket that sits there primed to hold any water heading down the hill. I know I focus a lot on some of our bigger reservoirs in the northern part of the state, but I did want to take just a moment to look at some of our central and southern reservoirs, and we'll focus on New Melones. Right now, 61% full, I should say, 98% of average. Don Pedro doing really well here, 140%. Or 104% of historical average. And then San Luis, again, 118% of historical average. Right now, we're about 100% full. That has been seeing really dry years over the past 3 years. Nice to see that come up. Lots of recreation and fishing over there. Millerton and Pine Flat. Now, we haven't mentioned these two a whole lot, but they are starting to come a lot more in focus. Now, you can see considerably different. Millerton, only 29% full right now, whereas Pine Flat, 45% full. It is the slightly bigger reservoirs, but the proximity to the Central Valley is very close. And when I take a look at some of these graphs, look at this one from Millerton. We're basically getting out as much as we're getting in. It is a line graph that we haven't seen with the other reservoirs, with such stark contrast up and down here, just trying to reduce the amount of water at Millerton. Unfortunately, it heads down the hill, so it's putting more water in areas that, quite frankly, are just trying to deal with too much water at this point. But we're going to take a look at how we're using some of that water. We've got some good news kind of coming down the pipeline here. And then we take a look at Pine Flat. This is a bigger reservoir, about 1 million acre feet, in 10,000 cubic feet per second, out almost 13,000 cubic feet per second. Again, this is because we've got all that snowpack yet up the hill, and that is eventually going to melt. Now, when are we going to see the highest river flows? Well, for the San Joaquin and the Kings, not until June. Those are going to be more of that central and southern part of the San Joaquin Valley. So unfortunately, we're still going to have to look at all of this continuing into our summer season. As far as our rainfall, there is a component of this that's not exactly just reliant on the snowpack and the snow melt. It's also how much rain did we have? How much was the ground saturated? And when you take a look at the totals compared to the averages, we're well above average. So all places throughout California, minus Palm Springs, which was slightly below average, everywhere coming out of drought. And also, I shouldn't say everywhere, but every place saw above average precipitation, doing a lot of drought reduction. And some great news on that side of things. It's just the unfortunate part is that we're still dealing with the flooding. Now, we just had a media briefing, and so basically the bottom line is we're in all three phases of drought: preparedness, response, and recovery. It's a unique situation. Usually it's one that follows the next, but in this case, throughout California, we're in all three phases happening right now. We're still preparing for all that snow to head down the hill and the possibility of more flooding happening. So there is financial help. We're getting both from the state and the federal government. Not all of it is in place. So there's a lot of folks that are still wondering, how am I going to get recovery efforts going in the financial as well as the structural? And that's going to take some time. Now, we have challenges and opportunities. Certainly, the challenges are going to be tracking that rapid snowmelt, but the opportunities are the groundwater recharge. What's happening is the Department of Water Resources is working with community partners, local agencies, to say, okay, let's just hold off on the permitting process. If you have access to extra water, let's get the recharge going. This is what that looks like. Now, for some of you that might be saying, okay, I'm not exactly sure what groundwater is. It's basically the water underneath our feet. We have been over pumping that, and so the ground has been sinking because we reduced that layer. If you look at it kind of like a sponge, we reduced that moist layer, that water layer, so the sponge is basically compacted. Once we're able to recharge that, the ground actually starts to come back up a little bit, and we have more groundwater in the drought years to use kind of as our savings account. So when we don't get the surface water from our reservoirs, we can pump that water to the surface, especially for many of our ag partners that need that water. We can get that going. There are actually residents that use that too for their drinking, the bathing, all water uses. Groundwater is a huge issue right now. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is trying to bring in line a sustainable plan for all water basins to get their groundwater up, because we overpumped for decades, really almost a century now. And so we've got huge issues with our groundwater and the lack thereof. This is going to be in the Central Valley that's most problematic, and they're saying, let's just get that groundwater going where we can, the recharge in effect, and just pull back on some of those restrictions from the recharge efforts. Now, on the other side of things, this is going to be a temporary situation where we see that unusually warm weather. We're likely going to be in a cooler scenario that's going to put less pressure on a lot of the heat melting the snow and access to the sunlight. And we actually have a likely wetter scenario as well. That'll be the first week of May. So we got to get through this week first. And this will be an on and off situation that we're dealing with. Our overall pattern, we really start to see the precipitation dwindle, especially by the time we get to June, July, August, even into early September. We basically see nothing in California unless we get the monsoonal flow going that will bring up some of those showers into the higher elevations. And our temperatures, conversely, are on their way up. So that's why we see this spring snowmelt so much of a concern. We're going to be near record heat in the Central Valley. Parts of the Sacramento Valley will be right around record territory, as well as the northern San Joaquin Valley for Stockton and Modesto. Highs will be right around the low 90s, records in mid 90s. There's the culprit, high pressure ridge sinking warming air. And as we dig in deeper into the weekend, we'll start tracking that low just off the coast. That's what will give us that shift in our weather pattern. And you'll see it in our 10-day forecast. We'll have a slight chance of showers coming in for some areas next week. Highs will cool to near 70. We'll keep tracking the flood situation in California.